Yo, Ryan here, aka Mac, and welcome. We have even more information on the plans for this Genesis Planet Tech, with many questions getting answered since it was shown off at Citizencon this year. As always, a huge thank you to all of my patrons and channel members. Thank you all so much for the support. It is truly appreciated. Cannot do it without you guys. So as we saw at Citizencon, Genesis is set to completely reimagine Star Citizen's planets, and I, for one, was pretty blown away by its visuals and its simulation, generating very realistic worlds while also catering for many upcoming mechanics like farming. Now, since Citizencon, Ali Brown, who is the Senior Technical Director for Graphics and Procedural Tech at CIG, took to Spectrum to answer a few questions regarding Genesis's capabilities and future with some pretty interesting updates. Plus, I would like to shed a little bit more light into what Cloud Imperium plan to do with this tech, as Ali can only speak for his team and what his team are planning, and oftentimes developers don't want to step on other teams' toes by elaborating in areas that are not within their purview. So hopefully this can shed a bit more light into why this tech is so important and why I am so excited for it. Also, in celebration of CitizenCon, GameGlass is doing a special 20% off sale for any lifetime pass until the 11th of November. So if you would like to convert your phone or tablet into your ship's dashboard, like you see here with this Aegis shard, then follow the link in the description and make sure that you use the code SMB2955 as shown here and in the description as well, and any sale made does directly support my channel with a direct kickback, so a huge thank you if you have chosen to do so already, or if you plan to do so in the future. Now, with that said, let us take a look at the recent answers from Ali. The first question is, can Genesis be used to make planets like Arccorp look better? Now, as we know, Cloud Imperium Games do plan to eventually go back over the Arccorp planet and bring it to more of its intended vision, which is with bodies of water and gardens as such, but currently, no, it cannot. Genesis builds worlds based on natural rule sets. However, he says some of the foundational tech of Genesis could allow this in the future, as it doesn't have to just be based on nature and can be used for more man-made structures. So city block generation could actually fit pretty well, but would need a bit of extra work. Now, something to keep in mind with this Genesis tech is, as much as it has been in the works for a long time now, there is still a ton more they want and can do with it. And once they have established it for the natural planet states, as we can see demoed at CitizenCon this year, they will further develop it for other worlds, like man-made structural worlds, and eventually alien worlds. So it is very exciting to kind of think about the potential of this tech and where it can get to with more iteration and expansion. Now, the next question is, has there been any progress on roads, and does this tech work for roads? Now, Ali says that roads are not in the immediate plans right now, and ultimately, it is up to Chris Roberts what comes next. Ali says his gut tells him that more varied weather may trump roads for now, though. Now, of course, many of us are very excited to see roads come along for many areas of Star Citizen, but if I was to choose between roads and more weather types, I think I would certainly go for more diverse weather. Roads will absolutely come along at some point, and I suspect it will be integrated into this Genesis tech in some way as well. Same for elements such as lava, for example, but I do think that roads are going to be a build option for us when it comes to base building, giving players the ability to connect structures via road networks, which I think they have stated in the past anyway. So we will see how this develops. But hearing Ali mention that he suspects more weather types are to come first, that excites me a lot. Next question is about Farmlands, and how they felt that Farmlands being visible from orbit was missing from the CitizenCon demo. Now, Ali actually says that they have never been asked about Farmlands in terms of the Genesis tech, and in most cases when developing Genesis, they had to scour Earth to find examples of land that were literally untouched by humans. But he will ask the creative director about this and see what they say. Now, this brings up quite an interesting dilemma, and I suspect this will mostly be down to lore and gameplay issues, more so than a planet generation tool. I'm sure as they A, develop the farming mechanic for 1.0, and B, work on planets that have had centuries of civilizations, we will see them populate planets with farms as a location, rather than a biome tile set, as these farms will need to be populated with farmers to work the land. Now, that's not to say that we wouldn't ever see a biome that gives the impression that it was previously farmed land, if narrative makes sense for that location, but I think that is something that will come to Genesis later down the line, and once they have established the proper lore for planets and the systems, as understandably, much of the system's lore is getting retconned now that procedural generation is being used versus the original plan of a select few landing zones that you are taken down to on rails. So, naturally, things needed to change. Anyway, next question is, and probably my favourite one in fact, is what happens if you crash a big ship into the woods? Will the crash be visible from orbit? Now, Ali says currently the answer is no, but in the future they would like to have a terrain modifier to spawn the impact in which it would remove trees and adjust the terrain so that it would be visible from quite a distance. And terrain modifiers do already exist, but currently they are not dynamic, nor are they performance friendly or optimized for network considerations. Now, this has actually been a part of the plan for Star Citizen for a long while, to have ships that crash into planets from either players or NPCs actually modify the planet's surface in a realistic way and persist, so essentially becoming its own point of interest that slowly decomposes and takes on the environment like plants and growth. Now, if you read the intended use for the Maelstrom physical damage system that they have been working on for quite a while now, the description reads, making use of the physics engine to create a system that looks and behaves realistically when large objects such as ships are damaged by weaponry or colliding with other ships, locations, or planets. So they fully intend to use this Maelstrom system to generate a, say, realistic wake and crash site when a ship dynamically smashes into the planet, which is of course quite a feat in itself, but as mentioned, with the biome accumulation system, over time that ship will initially burn with flames, for example, and then when the fuel runs out, based on the engineering system, the fire will go out, parts will rust and degrade, and eventually the biome will take over, be that sandblasting away its hull, leaving a carcass behind, or plants growing over the top, consuming it and concealing it, creating its own point of interest. This is something that I have been very excited to see come to fruition ever since we first heard about it, but it's likely going to be a long way off getting realized, not to mention the networking side of things, but I just love how this is their intention at some point, and Genesis will certainly be a stepping stone to getting to that point. Now, the next question is regarding Nyx 1, with them asking, how are you explaining the lore behind Nyx 1 now getting terraformed when originally it wasn't possible? Now, of course, with Ali being the graphics director and not the narrative director, he couldn't really answer this question, but he did say that they are still developing and testing this Genesis tech, and what we saw of Nyx 1 is subject to change in terms of final styling and ecosystems. But from a backer's standpoint, although I cannot remember if the write-up for Nyx 1 was this originally or recently changed, before Citizencon it did say this, but as I say, they may have changed it since it was originally concepted, but it says that Nyx 1 was actually a good candidate for terraforming, but they just didn't have the terraforming technology capable of doing it at the time. And of course, since 4.3, if I recall correctly, the news splash screen that we saw on the loading screen did say that they have made significant technical advancements in terraforming and that they can now potentially adjust the harsh climates on several previously terraformed worlds. So essentially laying the narrative groundwork for much of the retconning that is going on, and I'm sure narrative will come up with their own way of getting it rewritten into the lore at some point. Now, the next question is, will NPC loadouts be automatically distributed and tied to the Genesis planetary environment maps, so those NPCs living in colder environments, for example, will wear thicker clothing versus those living in warmer regions? Now, Ali says that the entity system team actually made it possible for the game systems to read the hierarchical context data, which includes planet data, but it is up to each game system to make use of this. So while this is plausible, he cannot speak for the other teams as to when or if they may use it or when that might happen. Now, firstly, it is great to hear that other teams can essentially plug into this data, ensuring that when they roll out something they've worked on, it can check that data and spawn it correctly. For example, fauna. When creatures start to come along into these worlds more naturally, they could essentially be native to environments that make sense. I know they really want to embed the fauna into the ecosystems and have them make sense to the worlds. This is likely the way they're going to do it. And as this question asks, which I'm sure is a pet peeve for many of us, not just myself, seeing NPCs walking around in scantily clad clothing when it's minus 35 degrees outside is madness. So hopefully the team who's responsible for that will utilize this tech and make it make sense, which I'm sure they will. Now, the next question is quite a complex one, but essentially it asks about the level of authenticity when it comes to how realistically Genesis can create worlds based on real-world data. Like, how does it determine whether a biome generates a meadow versus a forest? And can scattered rocks modeled like glaciers move over time, over, say, thousands of years? And the answer to this is essentially what we heard at Citizencon, which is that the Genesis system modeled natural rules at a fine scale, and in regards to vegetation, for example, this is ruled by various factors like soil quality, temperature, humidity, light availability, and the competition over that light, or soil quality in the surrounding area between flora, their reproductive rate, and much more. So trees, for example, will dominate if the conditions are right, but lower quality soil or cooler temperatures are going to factor into it as well, with potentially fewer trees sprouting up. They also do pick per planet which flora species are going to be available, so each planet will have a unique combination, which is great for diversity, rarity, having to travel around for specific things and such. But then for rocks, Genesis actually simulates the planets offline and uses erosion and weathering data to determine how the rocks and soil are broken down and transported. Now, this is all stuff that plays directly into gameplay. Mining, for example, as we heard, allowing players to look at locations where minables are likely going to form, like the sides of cliffs, for example, due to erosion. And hopefully even leading to much more realistic distribution and potentially opening up to more methods of mining with, say, mining veins spreading across vast areas of a planet, or even deep crevices requiring more specialist equipment to reach, like ropes and abseiling. The potential for just expanding mining alone is pretty huge. But then on top of that, as we've spoken about in the past, farming and growing crops, this opens up a large range of agricultural gameplay to come along, where choosing the right location to plant a certain strain of flora will matter. So soil type and quality being important. Maybe having to go and find a certain soil type and grab samples of that to then take back to your endeavor to set up that plant growth. But the right lighting and weather conditions will also matter. The temperature, the humidity, all needing to be considered and varying between crop species. And this is farming for all types of crops, be that vast food plantations, rare medicinal plants that need very specific conditions, or even drug farms. The option to own and operate a drug farm is an intended gameplay loop in Star Citizen, and this stuff makes it so. So when base building comes along, we are going to see mining towns come and go as resources are discovered and then eventually mined out, and that location no longer being profitable, or searching for the right location planetside to fulfill the needs that you want will take careful consideration, planning and research to make sure that the conditions are correct. And this is one of the reasons, if not the main reason, why Genesis blew me away. Okay, the final question is, with the Nyx system initially opening up next month in 4.4, but the Genesis planets of Nyx not coming until next year, will we see Nyx get the previous Planet Tech planets as placeholders until the Genesis planets are ready? And Ali says, setting up the Nyx planets using the previous iteration of Planet Tech would have added considerable wasted dev time, so Nyx will have no planets when it first drops, and then they will go straight to the new Genesis Planet Tech next year when it is ready. Now, for me personally, as I'm sure many are quite divided here as to which approach they wish CIG took, as much as I would have loved to see Nyx come along with all of its new Genesis planets in 4.4, I am very happy to have the introduction of Nyx with Levski, the asteroid belts, and anything else it brings without the planets, if it means when those planets do come along, they are going to look like what we saw at Citizencon, or even better by that point. Having a third system to travel to also opens up the potential for a lot of great gameplay with more missions, the interstellar transport that we saw, the huge mining opportunities, and if these planets are going to be built using Genesis for their first appearance, then I'm happy to wait. But there you go, that was this impromptu Q&A from Ali Brown in regards to Genesis. Big thanks to him for taking the time to jump on Spectrum and answer people's questions. Some great extra detail there from him, and hopefully for the areas that he wasn't not able to answer but didn't want to answer as they're not part of his team's work, I hope I've shed a bit of additional light into what Cloud Imperium are planning here. The Genesis tech, for me, is extremely exciting, not just from a visual standpoint, which it does look night and day better, but from a technical standpoint for what it can do for the future of Star Citizen. And this is why it is one of the most anticipated features for me, and I can't wait to see it come along next year, starting with Nyx 1. With that said though, if you do enjoy my videos, please do consider subscribing and helping the channel to grow. Also, I stream on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays between 2 and 6 PM GMT, or BST at the moment, soon to be GMT. And you can watch me either here on YouTube or live over on twitch.tv/SuperMacBrother. You are all more than welcome. Great place to watch us play Star Citizen, ask your questions, or just hear more about the news and so on. Hit the thumbs up if you don't mind, it does the channel a big favour, and tick that notification bell if you'd like to be notified when my videos go live. Again, a huge thank you to my patrons and channel members for all of your support. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.